It's 11 o'clock. All right. So even though Josh covered this in the last 2 minutes of his sermon this morning, we're going to talk about it again. So, yeah, welcome everybody. Welcome back for those of you watching on the live stream or on YouTube to A History of Promise. Today we are on Lesson 9. Last lesson, Lesson 8, we had a whirlwind tour of the kings of Israel and of Judah. Well, now we're going to be able to take things a little bit slower, a little bit more intentionally, and we're going to be taking a step back in time a little bit as we cover the history around the Babylonian captivity. So we're not going to be starting directly at the point where Jerusalem falls, but we're going to be talking about Assyria and Babylon and what leads into the captivity, and then moving into Persian reign throughout the Middle East on that. So just as a quick refresher on the first map here, which looks familiar, we looked at this one last week. This is what the Middle East looked like when we were going to the point of the fall of Israel and Syria. So we have the Assyrian Empire up here. Down here we have the Babylonian Empire, and Syria, the Phoenicians, Samaria or northern Israel, Judah down here to the south, and then Egypt over here. And that's the basis of power. But then, as history progresses, wars happen, things change, and on the next map you can see how far things shift. The various tribes over here turn into known as the Medes, turn into the Median Empire, which expands out, and that's modern-day Iraq and Pakistan and Afghanistan. So this kingdom basically goes right up into the borders of India, and then right here, and even a little bit over top of the Assyrian Empire. Assyria during this time is expanding and expanding and expanding up right into the point where it has engulfed essentially everything except Judah, the Philistines, and then Egypt down here. And you can see the little kingdom of Judah there is sandwiched between the two great empires of Egypt and Assyria. If you ever think of, in European history, there's this kind of running joke that Poland is just the battlefield of Europe. It's where all the great powers of Europe go to fight, is the fields of Poland. Happened in World War II, happened in World War I. It just happens a lot. Well, you can basically picture Judah here is where Egypt and Assyria go to fight. They are constantly having armies passing through as they go attack each other, and it's just kind of dependent on who's king at the time as to which side Judah is actually on. If Egypt has the upper hand and Egypt conquers and rolls through Judah, well, now Judah's on Egypt's side, and then Assyria comes back, now they're on the Assyrian side, and they're constantly flip-flopping back and forth between these two powers. However, as things progress, well, like Josh said this morning, all these great empires kind of eventually come to an end. But let's look at the position that Judah's in right now. So, like I said, they're between two great powers, Egypt and Assyria. What does this mean for Judah? Well, it means that any trade coming through the empires based on Judah's position has to go through Judah. More trade, more tax money, things tend to work out pretty good for them. But they're never really an independent state. They're always going to be under the control of either Egypt or Assyria. They're going to be paying tribute to one of the two of them at this time. And territory, yeah, Judah is kind of a puppet state at this point. Whoever's king, whoever sides with whichever empire, their territory is still their own. They still rule, but it's more of like a fiefdom of a kingdom than an actual standalone country in and of itself. And then we have the security. These two empires, Egypt and Assyria, are warring. And they're warring over these exact same things. They're warring over trade. Who gets to control the trade? Well, you have Egypt to the south, remember our map. You have the Nile River Delta. It's one of the most fertile, if not the most fertile land on the planet, even today. It is some of the richest soil, the best for growing crops. While the Mesopotamian Tigris and Euphrates River Valley is almost as good. It's very good. This whole area is called the Fertile Crescent. It's the breadbasket of the ancient world. Even under the Roman Empire, hundreds of years after what we're talking, Egypt is still what provides the majority of the food to Rome. So we have the Egyptians here, we have the Assyrians here. That's where all the food is, for the most part. You can still grow food throughout here, but that's where you get the best crops, you have the most fertile land, you're growing everything. You're not just growing food to survive and maybe like make a little money off the side. You're growing olives and grapes and pears and apricots and all these sorts of wonderful, at this point even luxury foods. Well, when they're going, unless they're going through ship, because you have the Greeks up here. All the Greek city-states during this time. So if you think of Athens and Sparta and all the Greek cities that we hear about in the New Testament, Ephesus, or like the great city of Rhodes, all of these cities are building up into the powerful city-states that we know of them in history. Well, they're still buying food and things from here. India still exists. They're not on the map here, but India still exists, so there's trade going through here. China still exists, and there's still the early ideas of the Silk Road, of trade, silk and various things being passed from China. Even in history, it's like the Chinese Empire, one of the great dynasties of China and the Roman Empire exist at the same time. There's Roman coins found in China. There's some Chinese things found over in Rome. They knew of each other. They didn't really trade directly, but there's that connection. But here in the Middle East, this is the crossroads of the ancient world, or of the old world, which is why later on, after you have the rise of the Ottoman Empire, they cut off trade or they charge you an exorbitant amount of money. So this is why they're fighting. They're fighting over territory and the trade routes that are all going through here, but they're also fighting for their own protection. Egypt here, I mean, they have the Sinai Peninsula, and it kind of narrows down as you get towards the Nile River there. That's a fairly defendable position there. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers in Mesopotamia offer a fantastic line of defense. However, in order to hold, you need some more of these powerful cities here. You want buffers. Just like if we think of the Cold War, you have the Eastern Bloc. What did the Soviet Union want? They wanted buffer states. So you have the Soviet of Poland, you have the Soviet of East Germany, you have the Soviet of Czechoslovakia, you have all of these other little Soviet countries that are just a buffer between the Soviet Union and NATO. Well, Judah's, again, Poland. They're the buffer until they are not. As we go through, like Josh said this morning, empires fall. Let's go to the new map after that one. Assyria eventually falls. This one's kind of busy, but this one was the most accurate one I could find. This red outline here was the height of what is the Neo-Babylonian Empire. So the Neo-Babylonian Empire, aka the Assyrian Empire, controlled everything down towards Jerusalem and around. This big purple blob here, that's the Medes, the Median Empire. They continue to expand out into Asia Minor and out of this little city. If you remember at the very beginning when everything started, the little city of Ur, known as Ur of the Chaldees, Well, out of the Chaldeans, you have someone who comes up and conquers the entirety of the Assyrian Empire. It was just supposed to be a breakaway of the Babylonian Empire, but the kingdom of Babylon succeeds so far that they take over all of Assyria. But how do we get there? Well, it starts with the Assyrian Civil War that happens. Now, the first name that we have here, Sennacherib, is one that you should be familiar with. We did talk about. Sennacherib is the one who comes in. He is the one who is at the gates of Jerusalem. He's taken Israel, he's taken the city of Samaria, he goes all the way and he conquers the second most heavily defended city in Judah, which is Lachish. There's still the ancient Sumerian siege ramp that is built up on the ruins of Lachish. He comes in and he appoints his son, Esarhaddon, as crown prince after his oldest brother. He's expanded the empire. He's set up this great empire. He's pushed back the Egyptians. Assyria, at this point, is kind of at its height. At least we think. Well, of course, what's the saying? Good times create weak men create hard times. Well, the times in Assyria were good. His son here ends up having to fight a war with his older brother, who his father skips over. Really, Sennacherib's oldest son actually dies. He gets captured in battle and then shortly after executed. So then, well, he needs to name a new crown prince. And his now oldest son, he names him crown prince, but then after about 10 years goes, actually, I think your younger brother would do a better job, so we're going to make him crown prince. He didn't take that too well. So that actually leads to about a 2-month civil war inside the Assyrian Empire between Esarhaddon and his brother. They fight, and you know what triggers it? His brother assassinates his father. That sounds familiar, doesn't it, when we were going through the kings of Israel? His father's assassinated, so the throne is up for grabs, and every brother is going for it. And the rightful crown prince, at least according to the records that we were left behind, Esarhaddon, becomes king. He becomes the emperor of the Assyrian Empire. Well, he establishes his rule. He's the one who, well, after Sennacherib dies, Judah rebels, and Tyre rebels, and Egypt rebels, and he crushes them. Just like his father did, he crushes them, puts them under, and continues building up the good times of the Assyrian Empire. And now, almost the longest reigning and probably the most well-known king of Assyria is this last one, Ashurbanipal. Ashurbanipal inherits the throne from his father, and Syria is at its height in terms of territory, it's at its height in terms of wealth and military power. Ashurbanipal, if this doesn't tell you how good of an age this is, he turns his eyes away from military matters, and he builds a library. Something that is, like, we've heard of the Great Library of Alexandria. That's a few hundred years away. This is before, and at this point, it was the largest library of its time. And it's not scrolls on papyrus and things like that. This is clay tablets. Imagine tens of thousands of tablets, about the size of my phone here, all with indented writing in them, because they use cuneiform on this. And it's actually this library, one particular tablet, that allows us to date everything that happened before this in Judah. Because it's in the Assyrian calendar where they say, on this day there was a solar eclipse. And we're actually able to go back in history and go through the cycles of the moon and its rotation and the rotation of the earth around the sun. And we're actually able to go back and determine exactly in our own calendar what date that is. And then, in other tablets that they leave behind, which they always date, they mention the kings of Israel, the house of David, the kingdom of Judah. And we're actually able to go back and, they're getting reports as to what's happening in Judah. And we're actually able to, thanks to this library, go back and see. He's probably one of the most influential. Why I say he's one of the most well-known is because us historians like him a lot, because he collected a lot of information that we're able to use today. I mean, most of it's in the British Museum, so you'd have to go to England if you wanted to see it. But he's at the golden age. Well, like I said before, good times create soft men create hard times times create good men. Well, Ashurbanipal, the times don't really get much better than that, so cracks begin to form in the Assyrian Empire. It's almost like every other year or every couple of years, there's a military revolt. Whether it's Judah, whether it's Tyre and the other Phoenician states, whether it's actual wars against the Medes or more wars against Egypt, there's this constant unrest. Because it's like every time a king dies, every time we think, oh, well, his army's over here busy dealing with the Medes, or he's over here busy dealing with Egypt, he's not going to care too much about a couple cities over here who all ally themselves and say, nah, we're not going to pay you tribute anymore. And the revolts just continue to happen over and over and over again. And there's alliances that form. Like I said, Egypt and Babylon actually ally themselves together against Assyria. Israel, the Phoenicians, and the Medes all ally themselves against. It's like we were talking the other day, the last time we were here. The Phoenicians and Israel, so the city of Tyre and the city of Damascus and the city of Jerusalem, all say, you know what, let's join together and we're going to rise up and we're just going to refuse to pay tribute. Doesn't end well for them. But the alliance that does end up working is the one between Babylon and the Medes. So that great empire off to the side that is almost enveloping the Assyrian Empire. And then the Babylonian kingdom, the kingdom of Babylon within the Assyrian Empire itself, ally together and they raise their hand against Assyria. And this is the rise of Babylon. Babylon was a kingdom. It was its own empire. Then it gets subjugated under Assyria. And they still have kings. They're just puppet kings, just like the kings in Israel were. Until eventually they're like, you know what? Let's cast off the yoke of Assyria. Let's become an independent kingdom once again. So, a man by the name of Nabopolassar becomes the first king of the Babylon Empire. Not the kingdom. There have been several kings of the kingdom of Babylon, but of the empire. He actually revolts against Assyria in 626 BC, roughly. This is actually another artifact in the British Museum. This is one of the tablets I was talking about, where it has all these little indentations, which is the writing system. This tablet talks about his rise. Essentially, not only was he fighting to free Babylon, the success he had against Assyria in just breaking free of the and becoming independent, he decides, you know what? I don't just want Babylon, I want it all. So the Medes and the Babylonians fight and rise up against the Assyrians, and eventually they're to the gates of the capital. On the next slide, 612 BC, Nabopolassar and his Median allies raze the city of Nineveh. The gem of Mesopotamia, next to Babylon, the capital of the Assyrian Empire, is utterly annihilated. It's not just, oh yes, we burned down the buildings and a bunch of people of the defenders died, and they're like, we made a right mess of the place. No. This is on a Carthaginian scale of the city is leveled and the inhabitants are butchered. It is the beginning of the end of the Assyrian Empire. The king of Assyria still manages to escape the siege, and his army retreats to another city and another city. But this marks the end of any type of control Assyria has. And it's this point where we actually see Judah stepping into the story once again. We remember the king Joash of Judah. He's the one, not Joash, Josiah. I can read. But we remember the king Josiah. He was the one who did right and was the one who reestablished the temple and took down the altars of the Baals and threw down the high places and was bringing Israel back to the Lord. Well, at this point in history, Josiah of Judah is allied with the Assyrian Empire. And Nikos the third of Egypt, he was the pharaoh of the time. I believe the Bible calls him Nico. Him and his army are traveling up through Judah to try and help the last holdouts of the Assyrian Empire. Nineveh's fallen. They've retreated all the way back into Syria, essentially on Israel's northern frontier is where they're holding out. And he's going up to help them. And but Egypt is going up to help Assyria. And Josiah, allied with the Babylonians, not the Assyrians, he's being a good ally. He's slowing them down. He's engaging the Egyptians, trying to stop them. So the Assyrian Empire crumbles. And what would be the result of that? Assyria's no more. We helped Babylon. We're in their good graces. Surely they wouldn't stab us in the back. And, we just defeated Egypt, which means Egypt's not a threat. We can build up again and become influential, and we can get back to that period of prosperity that we had under David and under Solomon. Well, he dies. Accounts vary, but essentially he either dies in battle or is wounded and brought back to Jerusalem, and he dies of his wounds. And Judah becomes a puppet state of Egypt, and Assyria falls. The very last one here, 605, is when we have Nabal-Palasir dies, just a few years after Josiah. And he leaves the throne to his son, Nebuchadnezzar II. Or as we just know him, Nebuchadnezzar. Or if you watch VeggieTales, he's the bunny guy. This is the man who is actually the doom of Jerusalem. Keeps falling asleep here. This is when we actually get to the fall of Jerusalem in this story of Assyria and Babylon. This tablet here is for Nebuchadnezzar II and his conquests that he has, and it describes how he subjugates Jerusalem. After 2 years of siege in 586, Jerusalem falls, and the temple and the palace and the city are decimated. They are left as charred ruins, and all of the gold and silver bowls and lampstands and everything of the temple is looted and taken away to Babylon, with the exception of the Ark of the Covenant. Because at this point, and this will become obvious later, the ark disappears from history. We don't know what happens to it. But at this point, we know Babylon doesn't have it. The next slide, Babylon the Great. This image here. This is kind of blurry in this lighting, but this here is an artist's interpretation of what the city of Babylon looked like at its height. This specifically is known as the Ishtar Gate. There's recreations of it all over the place, and again, the British Museum has it as well. You'll find that's a quite common theme. A lot of this stuff is in England now, or in Germany for some reason. But you see this, you have a line of towers on either side of the main street leading into this massive fortress. And it's actually a fortress. Imagine the people of Judah who are led away in chains, taken to Babylon to serve in the royal court. You're walking down the street and you just see this. Nothing like this exists in Judah. The most heavily fortified city that we had was Jerusalem. That was the largest city, the most powerful city, and it pales in comparison to Babylon. Babylon, with the destruction of Nineveh, is the crown jewel of Mesopotamia now. It is the seat of power in Mesopotamia, and it's the seat of the emperor. On the next, we actually have a map outlining it a little bit better. This is the inner city. So right here, it's on the Euphrates River here, runs right through the city. So you never really have to worry about water during a siege. You got a nice clean river right there. Right here, which is the, they tend to call it the processional street. That's the image we were looking at. And it goes right into one of the most heavily fortified points in the city. You have a military fortress right at the main gate, and then you have the inner palace with the ziggurat in the middle. But this is just the inner city. And if you look up here, the measurement talks about 500 meters. This is roughly 4 or 5 square, or, well, it's about 3 kilometers one way, a couple kilometers another. So it's around like 15, 16 square kilometers. In the ancient world, this is a massive city. And that's not it. This red line down here, which actually goes off and actually goes around, there's an outer wall. So not only is there a wall defending the inner city, there's a wall defending the crop fields and everything else that surround it. It is a well-fortified city. And you can just imagine the people of Judah brought here. You kind of see they never would have stood a chance. As Josh was talking about this morning as we were going through Habakkuk, the judgment of God came on Judah. Eventually it'll befall on the Assyrians. It just did. The city of Nineveh was annihilated. Just like Jonah wanted the city to be annihilated, it eventually happened, just not the way that Jonah wanted it to happen. Well, you can see here, going on to the next slide, the life that the Israelites had in captivity, it varies. Because not everybody is taken to Babylon. Some are settled in multiple other places throughout the empire. Some are even allowed to stay in Israel and Judah. Well, you got those who serve the royal court. We know several of those. Daniel, for instance. It's the best and brightest. The intellectuals and the artisans, the people with useful skills are brought into Babylon. So Daniel is taken to Babylon and he serves the court. We know of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, or Radshak and Benny. They're taken in and they serve in the court. They are the intellectuals, the ones who are useful enough. They're not just these poor dirt farmers. They're the cream of the crop out of the latest territory of the Babylonian Empire. And that's what they do. They perform artisanal work, some of them agriculture, the ones that are shifted over. But those who actually are resettled, life's not actually that bad. You can't go back home. That's the one thing you're not allowed to do. But you can own property, you can own a house, you can build your own house, you can set up your own farm, your own vineyard, you can own the property. You're just a citizen of Babylon now. You're not a citizen of Judah. And it's not the worst thing. Arguably, the people who get left behind have it worse. But yeah, that's the one key. Oh, small spelling mistake there. Not their own toes, their own towns. There are actually multiple records that we have found of specifically Jewish settlements, but there's not really any that we were able to archaeologically find. Whether they just either disappeared or became other cities throughout history, because this is still over 2,000 years ago. But we know at least there's Jewish settlements in Egypt, there's Jewish settlements all across Babylonia and even into Asia Minor at this point. But the entire country of Judah is broken. Going on to the next slide, please. Life outside of Babylon. This is particularly those who are left behind in Judah. Life is not easy. Judah's population was decimated. There are some who estimate that the entire population of the kingdom of Judah, which is a relatively small population, some estimates say like around 250,000, so 250,000, maybe 300,000 people lived in Jerusalem and the surrounding territories of Judah. By the time the exiles return, they estimate that there was maybe roughly 20,000. So you're talking about 4/5 of the entire population of Judah is either killed in battle or taken into captivity in Babylon. I mean, there's plenty of houses and fields that you can now farm. You can claim whatever land you want. Who's going to stop you? Because they're half a country away. But that's just more land for you to work with less people. And that's assuming that the crops haven't been destroyed, the towns are still in okay peace, which they're not. It's like we talk about the destruction of Jerusalem. The towns that surrounded Jerusalem, whenever we look at a town with archaeology, normally they actually tend to form in hills over the rubble of these towns. The ones that they've seen around Jerusalem from this period, the destruction, whenever there's destruction, there's a destruction layer where it's all scorched with fire and ash and that. It's very clear and broken pottery and all that. Basically, every small town around Jerusalem during the 2-year siege it was under was obliterated. As in, like, one day the town's there, the next, nothing. It's obliterated, and it's a large army that besieges a city, so all the food around there is probably gone. So you have to replant from scratch. It's a hard life that the people left in Israel and Judah deal with. Arguably, the captives had it better. And that's actually why some of them didn't actually go back to Judah at the end of things. They had a good life in Babylon. They had political offices, they had houses, they had lands. Sure, they're not in the land of their ancestors that God had granted them, but I mean, life's okay. They became contented with their lot in life. Well, moving on. we have the end of the Babylonian Empire. It was quite short-lived when you think about it. Babylon didn't last that long. It lasted for about 3 or 4 kings, or at least 3 or 4 significant kings. So about 100 years. After Nebuchadnezzar II dies in 562, the Achaemenid Empire, which is what people tend to call the Babylonian Empire in academia, or not the Babylonian, the Persian Empire, rises to power. Cyrus II, also known as Cyrus the Great, which again, Josh spoiled this morning. Can you tell I'm a little sour about that? He expands his empire. On the other side of the Persian Gulf, if you think of, if you actually go to the next map, please. Right here, so it's like here you have the Saudi Arabian Peninsula, and you have the Persian Gulf here. This little speck of land here is Persia. Again, like Babylon, was a relatively small kingdom. And that was part of the Median Empire, the Medes. While Cyrus the Great becomes king of Persia, and he decides, you know what? We're going to see what we can do. He raises an army and he expands. When I say he expands, he expands. This is the Persian Empire at its height, with the exception of Egypt here and these holdings in Greece up here. So basically the entire of Asia Minor, everything around Israel, and everything else going through the Median Empire, he conquers in the span of a few years. He explodes out with his army, and he is considered to be one of the greatest military leaders up until that point, with how well he was able to go through. And on the last slide, the last point, October 29th, we're actually able to get the date, again, thanks to Ashurbanipal's library and the collection that they had. October 29th of 539, Cyrus takes Babylon, that heavily fortified city with the walls on either side of the main entrance and the massive fortification of the Ishtar Gate and all the walls and the armies and all the power and wealth falls. Empires rise and empires fall, and Babylon is no different. Cyrus the Great comes in and he establishes the Persian Empire, taking over all of the claims of Babylon that used to be Assyria. And in his first year, he makes a proclamation. Next slide, please. In the first year of Cyrus's rule, and generally this isn't his first year as king. He didn't do all that in 1 year. That would be crazy if he did all that in the single year. In the first year in which he's conquered Babylon, he's taken over everything and he's gone down into Israel and Judah to the borders of Egypt. The first year that Jerusalem is under his rule, he makes an edict. He proclaims that everyone of the Babylonian Empire is free to return to his homeland. And any temples that they had that were destroyed or anything else like that, they are free to rebuild. This is what the people of the captivity were waiting for. After almost 80 years in captivity, Cyrus comes and he says, go home, rebuild your cities, rebuild your cultures, rebuild your temples. And this was actually probably the smartest political move he could have made. He's coming out of the Median Empire. The Medes, really before him, were just a bunch of smaller tribes and kingdoms. There were a few like unifying rulers, but their rule was more at the nobles allowed them to be the ruler. He goes and he just says, go back, go home, rebuild your lives, your cultures, go back to the land of your forefathers. And that was probably the best thing that he could do, because his empire, the Persian Empire, technically, the Persian Empire lasts until about 1912 when it turns into the country of Iran. This decision that he makes, nobody wants to rebel against the guy who allowed you to go home, allowed you to restart from where your parents and grandparents. It's like, imagine after World War II, everybody who fled from the Netherlands, from France, even the people who fled from Germany, who all went to England, to the United States, to other countries. After the war was over, it's like, go home. Go back home and rebuild. Rebuild your lives. Start over. This is that point for the people of Israel. And no small part of them actually take him up on this offer. When this happens, in 557, which is roughly the year that he's taken control, a man by the name of Sheshbazzar is given the vessels that were taken from the temple. So the gold and silver bowls and utensils and things that were part of temple worship, which were taken to Babylon and put into the treasury of the temple of Babylon, are returned. Just under 50,000 Israelites return. They return to Jerusalem and the surrounding areas, and they begin anew. And the best way that you can put this is in the words of Ezra chapter 3, beginning at verse 10, which says, "And when the builders had laid down the foundation of the temple of the Lord, the priests in their vestments came forward with trumpets, and the Levites, the sons of Asaph, with cymbals to praise the Lord according to the directions of David, king of Israel. And they sang responsively, praising and giving thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his steadfast love endures forever toward Israel. And all the people shouted with a great shout when they praised the Lord, because the foundation of the house of the Lord was laid. But many of the priests and Levites and heads of fathers' households, old men who had seen the first house, wept with a loud voice when they saw the foundation of the house being laid. Though many shouted aloud for joy, so that the people could not distinguish the sound of the joyful shout from the sound of the people's weeping. For the people shouted with a great shout, and the sound was heard far away." The people of Israel return. They lay down the foundations of the temple, and the old men who were taken away as probably children return, and they see the foundation, and it pales in comparison to the Temple of Solomon. It's roughly a third of the size of the original temple, and they weep because what Solomon had built had been destroyed. The kingdom of Israel was ripped in half and then annihilated. The people scattered to the four corners of the Babylonian Empire, and now they come back to restart anew, and it's never back to where they were. It is a bittersweet moment. They are home, they are rebuilding, but it'll never be the same. And the temple construction, it doesn't just take them a few years like it did under Solomon. It took them far longer. Like any large government, there's always red tape. And just because a politician says one thing doesn't mean they actually mean it, or that it's actually going to be enforced. In Ezra chapter 4, it says that the governors and officials from the province across the river, generally we believe this means the Jordan River, and it means those in Jordan and that region, came over to Jerusalem, and they saw what they were doing. And they opposed the construction of the temple and the re-inhabitation of Jerusalem. So they send a letter. And according to Ezra chapter 4, the letter is to Artaxerxes, king of Persia, who ordered a stop in the construction. There's just one issue here. Artaxerxes wasn't king of Persia at this time. And even this morning, I've been going through this for the past week, and even this morning I was talking with my brother trying to figure this out in my mind. I don't quite know who they mean by Artaxerxes. Because the kings you have Cyrus II, or Cyrus the Great. You have his son, his name's not Artaxerxes, and then he actually gets overthrown in a coup, and then one of his generals retakes it, and he becomes Darius the First. And then his son is Xerxes, as in the husband to Esther, and the guy who picks a fight with 300 Spartans in Thermopylae. And it's not until you get to Xerxes' son, Artaxerxes, that you actually have the first Artaxerxes. Well, really the second. He's Artaxerxes the second. But to actually be in this period. But that's over 60 years after they actually finish building the temple. It's completed in 515. So honestly, I don't know who they sent that letter to. It could have been Cyrus's son, although he apparently, through some sources, didn't really have a negative relationship with the Jewish people. So I don't know why he would have said, no, don't build the temple. But if you actually read in Ezra chapter 4, they're not so much complaining about the temple as they're saying they're rebuilding the walls. The walls that Nebuchadnezzar tore down, the fortifications of the city that would actually allow it to rebel again and again and again. They're rebuilding the walls. If you let them rebuild the walls, they're not going to pay you tribute anymore. They're going to be a thorn in your side. They're going to rise up and bring wickedness to your empire. That's basically the extent of the letter that they sent. And it's like, yeah, no, stop the construction. And it's not until about 15, 16 years later that they begin constructing again on the behest of some of the prophets. And when they start beginning, they begin in the second year of Darius's reign. So Darius the First is now king of Persia. They begin building again. And when the governor and people from the province across the river come in, and they're like, what are you doing? Who gave you permission to keep building? And, well, they write a letter to Darius. And Darius says, yeah, it's in the records here. This edict from Cyrus the Great says that every man is allowed to go home and rebuild his temple. So they can continue. Don't bother them again. Let them continue their work. And it's because of that after roughly 105-ish years, the temple of the Lord is rebuilt and rededicated in Israel. It wasn't until I hit this snag that I wanted to talk a little bit about the prophets as well, because it's towards the end of Israel and the end of Judah and during the Babylonian captivity that's when all the prophets are. It's like we know Daniel, obviously. We know the book of Esther. But this is when Isaiah, when Jonah, when Jeremiah, this is when all of them are writing, is this span of a couple hundred years. And we already heard today, the last couple months we've been going through the book of Habakkuk and the judgment that was going to befall Jerusalem. And then the judgment that would then, and then other prophets predict the judgment that befalls upon Nineveh and then upon Babylon. And in every single one of those prophecies, like Josh said this morning, because he spoiled my lesson, but like he said this morning, the words of the prophets are from God. Everything that was prophesied comes to pass at one point or another. We're still waiting on some. But in terms of the fall of Babylon, it fell. The fall of Nineveh, it fell. Samaria fell. Jerusalem fell. Egypt falls. And then, we'll get there eventually, probably next time, but Persia falls too. But the one thing that does not fall or falter or fail is the word of God and the promises that he makes to his people. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper, not to harm. Plan for a hope and a future. Let's all pray. Our gracious Lord and Heavenly Father, thank you for allowing us to come here again this morning to learn about the history of your people, to continue to learn about the history of promise that you have given to your people. We read the words of the prophets and the words of the historians, and we see that they match. We see that everything you said you would do has and will continue to come to pass. We thank you that we are able to be here to study your word and study this history, to learn more about you through this, that we may be building a closer relationship and better understanding of you and the will that you have for our lives. We ask that you be with us through the rest of this day as we go upon our homeward way, as we will hopefully be able to gather again as your people later on and to worship you again in spirit and in truth. We ask all this in your dear Son's precious and holy name. Amen. Thank you all, and we will see you all in a couple of weeks when we'll have more about the Persian Empire and the Maccabees and getting into some of the nitty-gritties of the intertestamental period.